He accepted an Apache slave without knowing she was the chief's daughter. The sun had barely risen over the small frontier town when Thomas stepped out of his modest wooden house. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of damp earth and smoke from the nearby chimneys. He had lived here for many years, far from the crowded cities, tending to his land and helping those who needed it. Thomas was not a man of great wealth, but he had a reputation in the town for fairness and a quiet courage that set him apart from others. People trusted him because he always tried to do what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous. That morning, Thomas noticed unusual activity near the edge of town. A group of traders had arrived, bringing with them a caravan of horses, wagons, and several captives. The townspeople gathered quietly at a distance, whispering among themselves. The captives were from the nearby Apache tribe, and it was clear from their expressions that they were terrified and exhausted. Among them was a young woman, perhaps in her late teens, with long black hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. She stood slightly apart from the others, her posture straight and proud despite the chains around her wrists. There was something about her that made Thomas pause, a quiet dignity that shone even in her dire situation. Thomas watched as the traders began to announce the captives for sale. The townspeople murmured among themselves, some interested, most hesitant. Slavery was not common in the town, but trading captives from tribes in the area happened often enough. Thomas felt a knot in his stomach. He had seen the fear in the eyes of many of these captives before, and he had never been able to turn away from someone in need. He knew that if he did nothing, this young woman and the others would face an uncertain and often cruel fate. He walked closer, keeping his hands visible to show he meant no harm. "How much for the girl with the black hair?" he asked the trader, pointing toward her. The man looked at him with surprise. Most townspeople were only interested in male captives who could work on farms or do hard labor. A young woman, especially one as proud as she appeared, was not often chosen. "She is not for free," the trader said with a sharp tone. "She is strong, smart, and will cost more than the others. Are you sure you want her?" Thomas nodded. He didn't need to know her story or background to understand that she deserved safety and respect. He would give what was asked. The transaction was quick. Thomas handed over the agreed amount, careful to keep his hand steady so the captives could see he was trustworthy. The young woman's eyes met his for a brief moment, and he saw a mixture of fear and cautious curiosity. Her expression did not change much, but Thomas could feel the tension in her body. He spoke gently. "You are safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you." She didn't respond immediately, but a tiny flicker of relief crossed her face. The townspeople watched in silence as Thomas led the girl away from the trading area. Some shook their heads in disbelief, warning him that he was taking a great risk. "Do you know what you're doing?" one man asked. "These people are dangerous." "You don't know who she is or what her tribe might do." Thomas simply shook his head. "I know enough," he said quietly. "No one deserves to be treated like that. She will not be harmed while I am here." The ride back to Thomas's ranch was quiet. The young woman, who he learned was named Ahuli, remained reserved. She spoke only when necessary, choosing her words carefully. Thomas did not press her to talk. He understood that trust could not be forced. Instead, he spoke about simple things: the land, the weather, and the small town where he lived. His calm voice seemed to ease some of her tension, though her eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings. She had been through much, and Thomas knew it would take time for her to feel safe. When they arrived at the ranch, Thomas showed her to a small, clean room in the back of his house. It was not luxurious, but it was comfortable and private. He made sure there was food and water ready for her. Ahuli looked around silently, taking in her new surroundings. She could see that Thomas cared about her safety, even if he didn't know her full story. That small care was enough to make her feel a spark of hope, something she hadn't felt since being taken from her home. Days passed, and Thomas allowed Ahuli to settle in. He gave her tasks suitable to her abilities, not as punishment, but as a way to help her feel part of the household. She helped in the kitchen, tended to the animals, and observed the land with a careful eye. She had skills and knowledge that surprised Thomas. She knew how to handle the horses gently, how to tend the crops in ways that preserved the soil, and even how to read subtle signs in the weather that he had missed for years. Each day, Thomas's admiration for her grew, though he never allowed it to interfere with the respect he maintained. The townspeople began to notice changes. Some were suspicious, believing Thomas was taking unnecessary risks by sheltering a captive. Others began to see the good in his actions, especially as they noticed Ahuli's calm and helpful presence on the ranch. She did not speak much to them, but her intelligence and composure impressed even the harshest critics. Slowly, the town's fear began to shift to cautious respect. Thomas's courage in doing what was right was making a difference, not just for Ahuli, but for how the town viewed justice and humanity. At night, when the ranch was quiet, Thomas often found himself thinking about Ahuli. Who was she really? What had her life been like before she was captured? And what dangers might her past hold? He knew that the Apache tribe valued honor and family above all else, and he worried that her people might come searching for her, either for revenge or to bring her home. But he also knew that he could not abandon her, no matter what dangers might come. His duty was clear. He would protect her, and he would do so with every ounce of strength he had. Ahuli, too, thought about her past. She remembered her family, her father, the chief of her people, and the life she had been torn from. She wondered what they must be thinking, whether they were searching for her or mourning her loss. And yet she could not deny that Thomas had treated her differently than anyone else had since she was taken. He had given her food, safety, and a space to live without fear. She began to feel something she had not felt in a long time: trust. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, there could be kindness in the world outside her tribe. One afternoon, Thomas took Ahuli to the fields to help with the harvest. As they worked side by side, he noticed the way she moved, careful and precise. He asked her about her life, gently, without pressing. She spoke in short sentences at first, hesitant and guarded, but soon her words became more fluid. She told him about the plants she knew, the ways she had learned to care for the land, and the animals she had grown up with. Thomas listened carefully, impressed by her knowledge and intelligence. He realized that she was more than just a captive. She was strong, resourceful, and capable of handling much more than anyone had given her credit for. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas and Ahuli began to develop a quiet routine. They worked together in the fields, tended to the animals, and shared meals. Their bond was built slowly on small acts of trust and understanding. Thomas never pushed her, and Ahuli never spoke more than she was comfortable with. But each day, the gap between them lessened, replaced by mutual respect and a growing sense of connection. Evenings were the hardest for Ahuli. She would sit by the window looking at the darkening sky, thinking of her family and her home. She missed them deeply and feared what might happen if her people found her. Thomas noticed her sadness, but never forced her to speak. He simply offered quiet companionship, sometimes sitting with her in silence, letting her know she was not alone. That, more than anything, helped her to endure the fear and uncertainty that still lingered in her heart. One day a scout returned to town with news of Apache warriors nearby. The townspeople panicked, but Thomas remained calm. He understood that these were likely scouts looking for a missing member of their tribe. He decided to prepare, quietly reinforcing the ranch and making sure Ahuli was safe. She watched him work, realizing that he was not just kind, he was brave, willing to face danger to protect her. She began to see him not just as a rescuer, but as someone she could trust completely, even in the face of the unknown. The sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Thomas and Ahuli stood together, looking out over the land. The quiet beauty of the evening did little to erase the tension of the days ahead, but it gave them both a moment of peace. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. They were no longer strangers. They had found in each other something rare: trust, safety, and a connection that neither expected. The night fell, full of stars, and Thomas returned inside his home, leaving Ahuli by the window. She looked up at the sky, thinking of the future, uncertain of what it held. But for the first time since she had been taken from her home, she felt a glimmer of hope. She knew that as long as Thomas was there, she had a chance at survival, at safety, and perhaps even at something more, a life where she could be free not just in body, but in spirit. The first part of her story had come to an end, but the journey was only beginning. Both Thomas and Ahuli were about to face challenges neither could yet imagine, challenges that would test their courage, their loyalty, and the bond that had quietly begun to form between them. The days after the Apache scouts were first seen brought a tense quiet over the town and Thomas's ranch, though nothing had happened yet. Thomas knew that danger was never far in these lands. He continued his work as usual, tending the animals and caring for his crops, but his mind was always alert. Ahuli had become a steady presence at the ranch. She moved with quiet confidence, her sharp eyes noticing details Thomas sometimes missed, and her knowledge of the land and animals proved invaluable. She did not speak much, but when she did, her words were careful, thoughtful, and meaningful. Thomas found himself paying closer attention to her every day. There was a resilience in her that was unlike anything he had seen. She had endured loss and hardship, yet she refused to break. Her courage was quiet, steady, and unlike the bravado some men in town displayed. He admired her, though he never allowed his feelings to show. To him, she was a guest in his home, someone he had a duty to protect. He wanted to make sure she felt safe and respected, and he knew that trust could only be earned through actions, not words. Ahuli, for her part, was learning to adjust to the routines of the ranch. The chores were different from what she had known, yet she adapted quickly. She fed the animals, helped repair fences, and tended the small vegetable garden Thomas had started. She also began to notice small things about Thomas, the care he showed in everything he did, the way he treated his neighbors, and the calm patience he carried even in the face of threats. She began to see him as more than just a man who had bought her safety. She saw him as someone she could rely on, someone whose presence made the dangerous world around them feel a little less frightening. The townspeople were still wary of Ahuli. Some openly questioned Thomas's decision to keep her, fearing that her tribe might come seeking revenge or that she might cause trouble. But as they watched her day after day, they began to see her for who she truly was, intelligent, capable, and gentle. Slowly, suspicion gave way to curiosity, and curiosity gave way to respect. Ahuli did not try to win anyone over with words or actions. Her character spoke for itself. She was not a slave to be feared or controlled. She was a person, worthy of dignity and kindness. One afternoon, while Thomas and Ahuli were repairing a broken fence near the edge of the ranch, a rider appeared in the distance. The horse's hooves kicked up clouds of dust as it approached. Thomas instinctively placed himself between the rider and Ahuli, his hand resting on the rifle at his side. As the rider came closer, Thomas saw that it was a scout from the nearby Apache tribe. The man dismounted and bowed slightly in respect. "I bring a message," the scout said in careful English. "The chief wishes to know the whereabouts of his daughter. He has sent word that she is missing." Thomas's heart tightened. He had known that her identity would eventually be revealed, but he had hoped for more time. He nodded calmly. "I will answer honestly. She is here, safe. No harm has come to her." Style looked at Ahuli, who stood silently beside Thomas. Her expression was unreadable, but Thomas noticed a flicker of something. Recognition, perhaps, or fear. The scout spoke again. "The chief is wise. He values honor. He will want to speak with her personally. You must prepare." With that, the scout mounted his horse and rode back toward the town. Thomas turned to Ahuli. "This day was coming," he said gently. "Your family will want you back. We must be ready whatever happens." Ahuli nodded, though her lips were pressed tightly together. She had feared this moment for weeks, knowing that her past would eventually catch up with her. Yet she also knew that Thomas had given her something no one else had: safety, trust, and a chance to breathe freely. She took a deep breath, steadying herself for what was to come. Over the next few days, Thomas and Ahuli prepared for the arrival of the chief. Thomas reinforced the ranch, making sure all entry points were secure, and ensured that Ahuli had a place where she could feel safe. She moved through the preparations with quiet determination, helping wherever she could. Her actions were deliberate and careful, showing the leadership and intelligence that had likely been honed by her upbringing. Thomas noticed how naturally she took charge of small details, organizing tasks efficiently and thoughtfully. As the day of the chief's arrival approached, tension in the town grew. Rumors spread that the Apache warriors were coming, and some townspeople feared that conflict was inevitable. Thomas tried to calm their worries, reminding them that he had always acted with honesty and respect. He told them that the chief valued honor, and that they had no reason to expect hostility if they approached this with fairness and truth. While some still doubted, others began to place their trust in Thomas's judgment. On the morning the chief was expected, Thomas and Ahuli stood together, looking out over the ranch. The sun rose slowly, casting a warm light over the fields and animals. Birds sang in the trees, and the wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers. For a moment the world seemed peaceful, almost ordinary, and Thomas allowed himself to hope that the meeting would go smoothly. Ahuli stood close, her posture straight and proud, yet there was a tension in her shoulders that betrayed her nerves. When the chief and his warriors finally arrived, they rode with precision and dignity. Their presence commanded respect, and the townspeople instinctively gave them space. The chief dismounted and approached Thomas and Ahuli with measured steps. Thomas stepped forward, extending a hand in greeting. The chief's gaze was sharp, intelligent, and full of authority. He studied Thomas carefully, as if weighing the man's character and intentions. "I understand you have my daughter," the chief said in English, his voice steady and clear. "Is she safe?" Thomas nodded without hesitation. "She is safe. No harm has come to her. I have treated her with respect and care as she deserves." The chief's eyes flicked to Ahuli, who met his gaze calmly, though her heart was pounding. She had feared this moment, unsure how her father would react after so much time apart. The chief turned his attention back to Thomas. "It is unusual for a man outside our tribe to act with such honor," he said. "You have done well." Thomas bowed slightly, showing respect for the chief's authority. "I only did what was right," he replied. "No one deserves to live in fear or pain." "She deserves safety, and I have provided it." Ahuli's father studied her carefully, noting her demeanor, her posture, and the calm confidence in her eyes. He realized that she had grown strong and capable during her time away, and that the man who had cared for her was worthy of respect. He nodded slowly. "You have done well, my daughter," he said softly. "You have lived with honor and courage." "And you, Thomas, have shown integrity. I will not question your actions." The chief then spoke to his warriors, and they relaxed, recognizing that there was no immediate threat. The tension in the air eased slightly, though the townspeople remained cautious. Thomas and Ahuli exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and respect that had developed between them. Though her father had arrived and the situation was serious, they had managed to navigate it with dignity and care. Over the next several days, Ahuli spent time with her father and the warriors. She shared stories of her experiences at the ranch, speaking of the work she had done and the lessons she had learned. Her father listened carefully, impressed by her courage and the careful choices she had made. Thomas continued to support her, offering guidance when needed and respecting the bond between father and daughter. As Ahuli spent time with both her father and Thomas, she began to see the world in new ways. She realized that trust and respect could exist even between people from very different backgrounds. She also understood that courage was not only about fighting, but also about making choices that reflected integrity and honor. These lessons would stay with her, shaping her actions and decisions for years to come. For Thomas, the experience was equally transformative. He saw firsthand the strength and wisdom of the Apache people, and he gained a deeper understanding of their culture and values. He also learned that compassion and integrity could bridge even the widest gaps between people, creating connections that might have seemed impossible at first. By the end of the second week, a sense of balance returned to the ranch. Ahuli had spent time with her father and the warriors, but she still returned to Thomas's home, where she felt safe and respected. Their bond had deepened, built on trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. They had faced uncertainty together, navigated cultural differences, and confronted the tension of the unknown, and in doing so, they had formed a connection that was rare and meaningful. Evenings were quiet but comforting. Thomas and Ahuli would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and earth, and the animals moved quietly in the fading light. In these moments they found peace, a chance to reflect on what had happened and what might come next. They knew challenges were still ahead, but they also knew that they could face them together, with courage, patience, and respect. The days that followed were filled with small victories. Ahuli helped improve the efficiency of the ranch, teaching Thomas and the workers new ways to care for the animals and crops. The townspeople began to see her not as a captive but as a valued member of the community, someone whose presence brought knowledge and stability. Thomas felt a quiet pride, knowing that his decision to act with compassion had made a lasting difference. As Part 2 came to a close, the future remained uncertain. The Apache warriors had returned to their lands, but the bond between Thomas and Ahuli had grown stronger. Both had learned valuable lessons about trust, courage, and respect. And though challenges would continue to arise, they now faced them with a foundation of understanding and connection that would guide them through whatever came next. The morning air was cool and still when the first signs of the Apache riders appeared on the horizon. Thomas stood at the edge of the ranch, his eyes narrowing as dust clouds signaled their approach. This was the day he had anticipated for weeks, the day Ahuli's past would arrive at his doorstep. Beside him, Ahuli remained calm, though her hands tightened around the wooden railing she held. She had known this day would come, yet nothing could fully prepare her for the moment her father, the chief, and his warriors would stand before her. Thomas gave a quiet, reassuring nod to Ahuli. "Whatever happens," he said, "we will face it together. Trust me." Ahuli's eyes softened slightly, and she nodded in return. She had come to rely on Thomas's steady presence, his courage, and his unwavering sense of right and wrong. In turn, Thomas had come to understand her strength, intelligence, and quiet dignity. Their bond had deepened through shared days of labor, quiet conversations, and mutual respect. Now, that bond would be tested in ways neither of them could predict. The riders reached the ranch gates and the horses slowed to a careful trot. Leading the group was a tall man with a commanding presence, his dark eyes sharp and observant. Thomas recognized him immediately from the description Ahuli had given. The chief of the Apache tribe, her father. He dismounted gracefully, his movements controlled and deliberate. Behind him, the warriors followed with similar precision, each exuding a quiet strength and confidence. The townspeople who had gathered at a distance watched in awe and apprehension. The chief's reputation was known far and wide, and his arrival stirred a mix of fear and respect among all who saw him. Thomas stepped forward to meet the chief, keeping his hands visible to show there was no threat. "Chief," he said respectfully, bowing slightly, "I am Thomas. I have done my best to care for your daughter. She is safe, and I have treated her with honor." The chief's eyes studied Thomas carefully, weighing his words, his posture, and the calm confidence he projected. He did not speak immediately, but continued to observe, as if reading the man's character in silence. Ahuli stepped forward then, her back straight, her eyes meeting her father's. She had grown strong and confident during her time at the ranch, and she now carried herself with the same dignity that had defined her as a child. "Father," she said softly, "I am safe. Thomas has treated me with respect. He has done what is right." The chief's gaze softened for a moment, recognizing the honesty and courage in his daughter's words. The chief finally spoke, his voice firm but calm. "I have heard much about you, Thomas. Few men outside my tribe would act with the care and honor you have shown. Tell me, why did you choose to protect her?" Thomas met his gaze steadily. "Because no one deserves to live in fear. She is not a captive to be mistreated or feared. She is a person, worthy of dignity and safety. That is all I have done." The chief remained silent for a long moment, as if measuring Thomas's integrity. Finally, he nodded slowly. You have acted with honor. That is clear, and for that, I will not question your actions. The tension that had filled the air began to ease slightly, though the warriors remained watchful, their eyes alert to every movement. Ahuli's heart was pounding, but she felt a sense of relief. Her father had acknowledged Thomas's actions, and she could see that he understood the care and respect Thomas had shown. For the first time since being taken from her home, she felt a measure of peace. Over the next few hours, the chief and Thomas spoke quietly together, discussing the circumstances of Ahuli's time at the ranch. Thomas recounted her courage, her intelligence, and the way she had adapted to her new environment. The chief listened attentively, occasionally nodding, impressed by the details Thomas shared. He realized that Thomas had not only provided safety but had also allowed Ahuli to grow, to use her skills, and to maintain her dignity. Ahuli observed the interaction between her father and Thomas carefully. She saw the respect they had for each other, the way they communicated without anger or accusation. She realized that trust and honor could exist even between people from very different worlds. In that moment, she understood that her experiences at the ranch had shaped her, strengthened her, and prepared her for the challenges she might face in the future. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the chief gathered his warriors and spoke to them in their native language. They listened attentively, and then, one by one, they approached Thomas and Ahuli with gestures of respect. Though they were fierce and capable warriors, they recognized the integrity Thomas had shown. Ahuli's father explained that Thomas had provided her with safety and care, and that his actions reflected honor, not disrespect. The warriors bowed their heads slightly, acknowledging the truth in the chief's words. For Thomas, this was a profound moment. He had known that protecting Ahuli could be dangerous, that her people might see him as an enemy or a threat. Yet through honesty, respect, and courage, he had earned their trust. He realized that integrity and kindness could bridge even the widest gaps, connecting people in ways that fear and prejudice often could not. Ahuli's father turned to her then, his gaze softening. "My daughter," he said, "you have lived with courage and honor. You have endured hardship and adapted with strength. I am proud of you." Ahuli felt a swell of emotion but held herself with the dignity she had learned to carry. "Father," she said quietly, "Thomas has given me safety and respect. I have learned much from him, and I am grateful." The chief nodded, acknowledging the bond that had formed between his daughter and the man who had protected her. With the initial tension resolved, the chief spent time with Ahuli, asking about her experiences, her feelings, and the lessons she had learned. She spoke of the work she had done on the ranch, the animals she had cared for, and the way she had learned to navigate a world very different from her own. Her father listened attentively, impressed by her resilience, intelligence, and the calm dignity she displayed. He realized that she had grown stronger and wiser, shaped by both the hardships she had faced and the kindness she had received. Thomas watched the interaction quietly, giving them space while still remaining nearby. He understood the importance of this reunion and the respect that needed to be shown. Though he cared deeply for Ahuli, he knew that her relationship with her father and her people was primary. His role was to protect and support, and he fulfilled it without hesitation. As the day progressed, the townspeople observed the interactions from a safe distance. They saw the chief and his warriors treat Thomas with respect, acknowledging the integrity he had shown. This moment shifted perceptions in the town. As people began to see the importance of honesty, courage, and respect across cultural divides, fear and prejudice slowly gave way to admiration and understanding. In the late afternoon, Thomas and the chief spoke privately once more. "I know your people value loyalty and family above all else," Thomas said. "I want you to know that I have done my best to honor those values in caring for your daughter." The chief nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You have honored not only my daughter but also our people. That is something not all men could do. Your actions will be remembered." Ahuli stood nearby, observing the mutual respect between the two men. She realized that the world was not as simple as she had once thought. There were people who could act with honor, even when circumstances were difficult. There were connections that could be formed through trust, courage, and integrity. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the experiences she had at the ranch, and for the bond she had formed with Thomas. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, the chief made a decision. "Thomas," he said, "you have done well. You have provided safety and dignity for my daughter. For that, I will not seek revenge or harm. You have my respect." Thomas bowed, grateful for the acknowledgement. "Thank you, Chief."
That means more than I can say.
Ahuli stepped forward and embraced her father briefly, then turned to Thomas. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes reflecting the depth of her gratitude.
"For everything," Thomas smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It was the right thing to do," he replied.
Nothing more. The chief and his warriors remained for a short while longer, observing the ranch and speaking quietly with Thomas. They recognized the care and attention he had put into maintaining the property and ensuring Ahuli's safety. The respect between the two men deepened, creating a foundation for trust and future cooperation between Thomas, the townspeople, and the Apache tribe. As evening fell, the chief and his warriors prepared to leave. Ahuli would return to her people, but she did so with the confidence and knowledge she had gained at the ranch. Thomas had provided more than protection. He had given her lessons in trust, courage, and human kindness that would remain with her for life. Before departing, the chief turned to Thomas one last time. "You have acted with honor, and that will not be forgotten. If ever you or your people need aid, you may call upon us, and we will answer." Thomas nodded solemnly.
"I will remember."
"Thank you." With that, the chief and his warriors rode off into the distance, their figures growing smaller as they disappeared over the hills. Ahuli watched them go, her heart full of emotion. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and separation, yet she had emerged stronger and wiser. She had learned that trust could bridge worlds, and that courage and integrity could create bonds that fear and prejudice could not break. Thomas and Ahuli stood together, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. The ranch was quiet, the animals settling for the night, the fields bathed in the soft glow of twilight. In that moment, both felt a sense of accomplishment and peace. They had faced a challenge that could have torn them apart, yet through trust, respect, and courage, they had come through stronger. Though the journey was not yet complete and future challenges awaited, the events of the day had changed them both. Ahuli would return to her people carrying with her the lessons and experiences she had gained, while Thomas would continue his life on the ranch, enriched by the knowledge that acts of honor and courage could shape not only the present but the future. Part 3 ended with a sense of resolution and hope. The revelation of Ahuli's identity and the meeting with her father had tested their courage, loyalty, and trust, but both had proven themselves worthy. Now, as night fell over the ranch, they looked forward to the days ahead, knowing that the bonds they had formed would guide them through whatever challenges awaited. The morning sun rose gently over the horizon, casting golden light across Thomas's ranch. The air was crisp, carrying the soft scents of grass, soil, and animals stirring in their pens. Today was the day Ahuli would leave the ranch to return to her people. Though her father had acknowledged Thomas's honor and promised her safety, the thought of parting filled both their hearts with a mix of pride, gratitude, and quiet sadness. Ahuli moved through the ranch one last time, observing every detail she had come to know so well. The fences she had helped repair stood strong. The animals were calm and well-fed, and the gardens she had tended thrived under the warm sunlight. She realized how much she had grown during her time here, not just in skill, but in confidence, resilience, and understanding. The ranch had become a place of learning, safety, and quiet strength, and she felt the weight of leaving it behind. Thomas watched her silently, careful not to intrude on her thoughts. He had grown attached to Ahuli, though he never allowed sentiment to cloud his respect for her independence. She was no longer simply a guest in his home. She had become a partner in maintaining it, a presence that brought calm, insight, and courage to every task. He felt pride and sorrow at the thought of her departure, knowing that her life with her people would continue, but that the bond they had formed would endure. Ahuli paused near the small vegetable garden, running her fingers over the leaves she had carefully tended. She thought of the days spent working alongside Thomas, of the quiet conversations and the lessons learned in patience, trust, and courage. She remembered the fear she had felt when first brought to the ranch, the uncertainty of being among strangers, and the relief of discovering someone who treated her with respect and dignity. All of those experiences had shaped her into the strong, confident person she had become. Thomas approached her, his steps careful on the soft earth. "You have done well," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I am proud of the courage you have shown and the wisdom you have gained. Your people are fortunate to have you back." Ahuli turned to him, her dark eyes meeting his with a mixture of gratitude and respect. "And I am grateful," she said softly. "You gave me safety when I had none. You treated me as a person, not as a possession or a captive. I will never forget that." They walked together through the ranch one last time, checking on the animals and ensuring that everything was in order. Each moment felt significant, every detail a reminder of the time they had shared. Thomas noticed how naturally Ahuli had learned the rhythms of the ranch, how quickly she adapted to every task, and how much she had grown in both confidence and skill. She, in turn, noticed the quiet wisdom of Thomas, his patience, and his unwavering commitment to doing what was right, even when it was difficult. As the sun climbed higher, the sound of approaching horses announced the arrival of the chief and his warriors. Ahuli's father had come to escort her home, and Thomas prepared to meet them. The chief dismounted with the same controlled grace that had impressed Thomas during their first meeting. Behind him, the warriors formed a respectful line, their expressions watchful but calm. Thomas stepped forward to greet the chief. "Your people are here," he said. "I have made sure she is ready to return." The chief nodded, his eyes reflecting both pride and concern. "You have done well," he said. "She has grown stronger and wiser during her time with you. That is something not all men could achieve. You have my respect and gratitude." Ahuli's father turned to her, his gaze softening. "My daughter," he said, "you have endured challenges with courage and honor. You have learned much, and now you return to your people stronger than before." Ahuli felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and sadness. "Father," she said, "Thomas has given me safety and lessons I will carry with me always. I am grateful to him for everything." The chief nodded, acknowledging the bond that had formed between Thomas and his daughter. Thomas stepped back, allowing the reunion to take place. Ahuli embraced her father briefly, feeling the warmth and reassurance of family she had feared lost. Then, turning to Thomas, she placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady but heartfelt, "for trusting me, for protecting me, and for teaching me that courage and respect can exist even in the darkest times." Thomas smiled gently. "It was the right thing to do," he replied. Nothing more. The chief watched the interaction quietly, recognizing the respect and gratitude shared between the two. He understood that Thomas had not only protected his daughter, but had also nurtured her growth, giving her the strength and confidence to face the challenges ahead. He gestured for his warriors to prepare for the journey home, and Ahuli gathered her belongings, ready to return to her tribe. Before leaving, the chief spoke to Thomas privately. "You have acted with honor," he said. "Your integrity and courage will not be forgotten. If ever you or your people need assistance, we will answer. Your actions have created trust between our people, and that trust is a rare and valuable gift." Thomas nodded solemnly. "I will remember," he said. "And I am grateful for your understanding." Ahuli's journey with her father and the warriors began as the sun reached its highest point. She rode alongside them, her posture straight and confident, her mind reflecting on the lessons she had learned at the ranch. She thought of the days spent with Thomas, of the quiet moments of trust and understanding, and of the courage it had taken to face uncertainty and fear. She realized that the experiences she had gained were more than survival. They were life lessons she would carry forever. During the journey, Ahuli spoke sparingly but thoughtfully with her father. She shared insights she had gained from living among people outside her tribe, the skills she had learned, and the knowledge she had gained from the land. Her father listened carefully, impressed by her maturity, intelligence, and the careful thought she put into her words. He understood that her time at the ranch had shaped her into someone capable of bridging worlds and navigating challenges with wisdom and integrity. Thomas watched them ride away from a distance, feeling a mix of pride and quiet sadness. He had done his duty, protected Ahuli, and earned the respect of her people. But the bond they had formed was meaningful, and parting was never easy. He knew that their experiences together would remain with both of them, shaping the choices and paths they would follow in the future. The townspeople observed the departure, noting the peaceful and respectful interaction between Thomas and the chief. The incident had changed perceptions in the community, showing that trust, integrity, and courage could overcome fear and prejudice. They saw that understanding and respect between people of different backgrounds was possible, and that kindness and honor could create lasting bonds. As the sun began to set, Ahuli and her father arrived at the edge of her tribe's village. The chief was greeted warmly by the elders and other family members who had feared she might be lost forever. Ahuli's father introduced Thomas's actions, explaining how he had protected her and treated her with dignity. The elders and family members were grateful and impressed by the man who had shown such courage and honor. Ahuli dismounted and took a moment to look at her surroundings, absorbing the familiar sights, sounds, and smells of her people's village. She felt a deep sense of belonging, knowing she was returning to her family and her culture. At the same time, she carried the lessons of the ranch with her, the trust, respect, and quiet courage that Thomas had instilled through his actions. She understood that her life had been shaped by both worlds, and that she could take the best of each to build her future. Thomas, standing at the edge of the village, gave a quiet wave. Ahuli returned the gesture, her eyes shining with gratitude and affection. Though words could not fully capture the bond they had formed, the gesture was enough to express the respect, trust, and understanding that had grown between them. As the days passed, Ahuli settled back into life with her people, bringing with her new skills, confidence, and a deeper understanding of human character. She shared her experiences at the ranch, teaching others the lessons of patience, courage, and respect she had learned. Her father continued to speak highly of Thomas, ensuring that the stories of his honor and integrity would be remembered by the tribe. For Thomas, life on the ranch returned to its quiet rhythm. He tended the land, cared for the animals, and continued his work with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the actions he had taken had made a difference, not only in protecting Ahuli but in fostering trust between his people and the Apache tribe. He had learned that courage and integrity could change lives, that respect could bridge worlds, and that simple acts of kindness could create lasting bonds. In the evenings, Thomas often reflected on the events of the past months, the arrival of Ahuli, the challenges they had faced together, and the eventual reunion with her father had taught him lessons he would never forget. He understood that life was full of uncertainty and risk, but that courage, honesty, and respect could guide people through even the most difficult times. Ahuli, too, reflected on her journey. She had been taken from her home, faced danger and uncertainty, and discovered a world beyond what she had known. She had learned the value of trust, the strength that comes from courage, and the power of integrity. Though she had returned to her people, the bond she shared with Thomas remained, a quiet reminder of the lessons and experiences that had shaped her growth. The story ended not with fanfare or conflict, but with quiet resolution. Ahuli was safe with her people, Thomas had acted with honor, and both had gained valuable lessons about courage, trust, and respect. The events had forged connections that would endure, shaping future interactions and creating a legacy of integrity that would be remembered by both the town and the Apache tribe. The sun set over the village and the ranch, casting long shadows across the land. Life continued, as it always does, but the experiences, bonds, and lessons remained, carried in the hearts and minds of those who had lived them. Ahuli and Thomas had faced challenges, honored one another, and emerged stronger, proving that trust, courage, and integrity could overcome fear and uncertainty, leaving a lasting impact on all who witnessed their journey.